I think it's a perfect opportunity to go to the Bible and read these descriptions of the people involved in the Bible. So I'm going to start with Adam. We can hardly imagine what it must have been like. Oh, and I'm doing this from the Genesis book since we're still reading the Genesis book. We can hardly imagine what it must have been like to be the first and only person on earth. It's one thing for us to be lonely. It was another for Adam, who had never known another human being. He missed much that makes us who we are. He had no childhood, no parents, no family or friends. He had to learn to be human on his own. Fortunately, God didn't let him struggle too long before presenting him with an ideal companion and made Eve. Theirs was a complete innocent and open oneness without a hint of shame. One of Adam's first conversations with his delightful new companion must have been about the rules of the garden. Before God made Eve, he had already given Adam complete freedom in the garden, with the responsibility to tend and care for it. But one tree was off limits, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam would have told Eve about this. She knew when Satan approached her that the tree's fruit was not to be eaten. However, she decided to eat the forbidden fruit. And then she offered some to Adam. At that moment, the fate of creation was on the line. Sadly, Adam didn't pause to consider the consequences. He went ahead and ate. In that moment of small rebellion, something large, beautiful, and free was shattered, God's perfect creation. Man was separated from God by his desire to act on his own. The effect on a plate glass window is the same whether a pebble or a boulder is hurled at it. The thousands of fragments can never be regathered. In the case of man's sin, however, God already had a plan in motion to overcome the effects of the rebellion. The entire Bible is a story of how that plan unfolds, ultimately leading to God's own visit to earth through his son Jesus. His sinless life and death made it possible for God to offer forgiveness to all who want it. Our small and large acts of rebellion prove that we are descendants of Adam. Only by asking forgiveness of Jesus Christ can we become children of God. Strengths and accomplishments. Okay, so Adam was the first zoologist, the one who names animals. He was the first landscape architect placed in the garden to care for it. He was the father of the human race. He was the first person made in the image of God and the first human to share an intimate personal relationship with God. Weaknesses and mistakes: avoided responsibility and blamed others, chose to hide rather than confront, made excuses rather than admitting the truth. Greatest mistake: teamed up with Eve to bring sin into the world. Lessons from his life. As Adam's descendants, we all reflect to some degree in the image of God. God wants people who, though free to do wrong, choose instead to love him. We should not blame others for our faults. We cannot hide from God. Vital statistics: where? Garden of Eden. Occupation: caretaker, gardener, farmer. Relatives: wife Eve. Sons: Cain, Abel, Seth. Numerous other children. The only man who had never had an earthly mother or father. Key verses: the man said, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some of the fruit from the tree and I ate it. That was found in Genesis 3:12. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. That's in the 1st of Corinthians 15:22. Okay, so that was Adam. Let's see who else is here. Eve. Okay, we know very little about Eve, the first woman in the world. Yes, she is the mother of us all. She was the final piece of the intricate and amazing puzzle of God's creation. Adam now had another human being with whom to fellowship, someone with an equal share in God's image. He was someone alike enough for companionship, yet different enough for relationship. Together they were greater than either could have been alone. Eve was approached by Satan in the Garden of Eden, where she and Adam lived. He questioned her contentment. How could she be happy when she was not allowed to eat from one of the fruit trees? Satan helped Eve shift her focus from all that God had done and given to the one thing he had withheld, and Eve was willing to accept Satan's viewpoint without checking with God. Sound familiar? How often is our attention drawn from the much that is ours to the little that isn't? We get that I've got to have it feeling. Eve was typical of us all, and we consistently show we are her descendants by repeating her mistakes. Our desires, like Eve's, can be easily manipulated. They are not the best basis for actions. We need to keep God in our decision-making process always. His word, the Bible, is our guidebook in decision-making. So Eve's strengths and accomplishments. First wife and mother. First female. As such, she shared a special relationship with God and co-responsibility with Adam over creation and displays certain characteristics of God. Weaknesses and mistakes. Allowed her contentment to be undermined by Satan. Acted impulsively without talking either to God or to her mate. Not only sinned, but shared her sin with Adam. When confronted, blamed others. Lessons from her life. The female shares in the image of God. The necessary ingredients for a strong marriage are commitment to each other, companionship with each other, complete oneness, absence of shame, which is found in Genesis 2:24 and 25. The basic human tendency to sin goes back to the beginning of the human race. Vital statistics: where? Garden of Eden. Occupation: wife, helper, companion, co-manager of Eden. Relatives: husband Adam, sons Cain, Abel, Seth, numerous other children. Key verse: the Lord said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." And that's found in Genesis 2:18. The next one is Abel. Abel was the second child born into the world, but the first one to obey God. All we know about this man is that his parents were Adam and Eve. He was a shepherd. He presented pleasing sacrifices to God, and his short life was ended at the hands of his jealous older brother Cain. The Bible doesn't tell us why God liked Abel's gift and disliked Cain's, but both Cain and Abel knew what God expected. Only Abel obeyed. Throughout history, Abel is remembered for his obedience and faith. That's found in Hebrews 11:4. And he is called righteous in Matthew 23:25. The Bible is filled with God's general guidelines and expectations for our lives. It is also filled with more specific directions. Like Abel, we must obey regardless of the cost and trust God to make things right. So Abel's strengths and accomplishments: first member of the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, first shepherd, first martyr for truth. And you'll find that in Matthew 23:35. God hears those who come to him. Lessons from his life. God hears those who come to him. God recognizes the innocent person and sooner or later punishes the guilty. Vital statistics: where? Just outside of Eden. Occupation: shepherd. Relatives: parents Adam and Eve, brother Cain. Key verse: by faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. Hebrews 11:4. Abel's story is told in Genesis chapter 4, 1-8. He is also mentioned in Matthew 23:35. Luke 11:51, Hebrews 11:4, and 12:24. So that was Abel. Now it's Cain. And we're in chapter 6, by the way. Cain, in spite of parents' efforts and worries, conflicts between children and families seem inevitable. Sibling relationships allow both competition and cooperation in most cases. A mixture of loving and fighting eventually creates a strong bond between brothers and sisters. It isn't unusual, though, to hear parents say, "They fight so much, I hope they don't kill each other before they grow up." In Cain's case, the troubling potential became a tragedy. And while we don't know many details of this first child's life, his story can still teach us. Cain got angry, furious. Both he and his brother Abel had made sacrifices to God, and his had been rejected. Cain's reaction gives us a clue that his attitude was probably wrong from the start. Cain had a choice to make. He could correct his attitude about his sacrifice to God, or he could take out his anger on his brother. His decision is a clear reminder of how often we are aware of opposite choices, yet choose the wrong just as Cain did. We may not be choosing to murder, but we are still intentionally choosing while we shouldn't. The feelings motivating our behavior can't always be changed by simple thought power. But here we began to experience God's willingness to help. Asking for his help to do what is right can prevent us from setting into motion actions that we will later regret. Cain's strengths and accomplishments: first human child, first to follow in father's profession, which was farming. Weaknesses and mistakes: when disappointed, reacted in anger, took the negative option, even when a positive possibility was offered, was the first murderer. Lessons from his life: anger is not necessarily a sin, but actions motivated by anger can be so sinful. Anger should be the energy behind good action, not evil action. What we offer to God must be from the heart, the best we are and have. The consequences of sin may last a lifetime. Vital statistics: where? Near Eden, which was probably located present-day Iraq or Iran. Occupation: farmer, then wanderer. Relatives: parents, Adam, Eve. Brothers: Abel, Seth, and others not mentioned by name. Key verse: if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is encroaching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Genesis 4:7. Cain's story is told in Genesis 4:1-17. He is also mentioned in Hebrews 11:4, John 13, Jude 11. Noah. The story of Noah's life involves not one, but two great and tragic floods. The world in Noah's day was flooded with evil. The number of those who remembered the God of creation, perfection, and love had dwindled to one of God's people. Only Noah was left. God's response to the severe situation was a 120-year-long last chance, during which he had Noah build a graphic illustration of the message of his life. Nothing like a huge boat on dry land to make a point. For Noah, obedience meant a long-term commitment to a project. Many of us have trouble sticking to any project. That's me. Whether or not it is directed by God. It is interesting that the length of Noah's obedience was greater than the lifespan of people today. The only comparable long-term project is our very lives. But perhaps this is one great challenge Noah's life gives us: to live in acceptance of God's grace, an entire lifetime of obedience and gratitude. Noah's strengths and accomplishments: only follower of God left in his generation, second father of the human race, man of patience, consistency, and obedience, first major shipbuilder. Weaknesses and mistakes: got drunk and embarrassed himself in front of his sons. Lessons from his life: God is faithful to those who obey him. God does not always protect us from trouble, but cares for us in spite of trouble. Obedience is a long-term commitment. We may be faithful, but our sinful nature always travels with us. Vital statistics: where? We're not told how far from the Garden of Eden people had settled. Occupation: farmer, shipbuilder, and preacher. Relatives: grandfather of Methuselah, father Lamech, sons Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Key verse: Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Genesis 6:22. Noah's story is told in Genesis 5:29-10:32. He is also mentioned in 1 Chronicles 1-3, Isaiah 54:9, Ezekiel 14:14 and 20, Matthew 24:37 and 38, Luke 3:36, 7:26 and 27, Hebrews 11:7, 1 Peter 3:20, 2 Peter 2:5. Okay, so that was Noah. Okay, back to chapter 14, Lot. So some information about Lot. Some people simply drift through life. Their choices, when they muster the will to choose, tend to follow the course of least resistance. Lot, Abram's nephew, was such a person. When still young, Lot lost his father. Although this must have been hard on him, he was not left without strong role models in his grandfather Terah and his uncle Abram, who raised him. Still, Lot did not develop their sense of purpose. Throughout his life, he was so caught up in the present moment that he seemed incapable of seeing the consequences of his actions. It is hard to imagine what his life would have been like without Abram's careful attention and God's intervention. By the time Lot drifted out of the picture, his life had taken an ugly turn. He had so blended into the sinful culture of his day that he did not want to leave it. Then his daughters committed incest with him. His drifting finally took him in a very specific direction, destruction. Lot, however, is called righteous in the New Testament, 2 Peter 2:7 and 8. Ruth, a descendant of Moab, was an ancestor of Jesus, even though Moab was born as a result of Lot's incestuous relationship with one of his daughters. Lot's story gives hope to us that God forgives and often brings about positive circumstances from evil. What is the direction of your life? Are you headed toward God or away from Him? If you're a drifter, the choice for God may seem difficult, but it is the one choice that puts all other choices in a different light. Lot's strengths and accomplishments. He was a successful businessman. Peter calls him a righteous man, 2 Peter 2:7 and 8. Weaknesses and mistakes. When faced with decisions, he tended to put off deciding, then chose the easiest course of action. When given a choice, his first reaction was to think of himself. Lessons from his life. God wants us to do more than drift through life. He wants us to be an influence for Him. Vital statistics. Where lived first in Ur of the Chaldeans, then moved to Canaan with Abram. Eventually, he moved to the wicked city of Sodom. Occupation, wealthy sheep and cattle rancher, also a city official. Relatives, father Haran, adopted by Abram when his father died. The name of his wife, who turned into a pillar, salt, is not mentioned. Key verse. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of the two daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. Genesis 19:16. Lot's story is told in Genesis 11:14 and 11 to 14. 19, he is also mentioned in Deuteronomy 2:9, Luke 7:28 to 32, 2 Peter 2:7 and 8. So that was the story of Lot. Melchizedek. Do you like a good mystery? History is full of them. They usually involve people. One of the most mysterious people in the Bible is the King of Peace, Melchizedek. Melchizedek. He appeared one day in the life of Abraham, then Abram, and was never heard from again. What happened that day, however, was to be remembered throughout history and eventually became a subject of a New Testament letter, Hebrews. This meeting between Abram and Melchizedek was the most unusual. Although the two men were strangers and foreigners to each other, they shared a most important characteristics. Both worshipped and served the one God who made heaven and earth. This was a great moment of triumph for Abram. He had just defeated an army and regained the freedom of a large group of captives. If there was any doubt in his mind about whose victory it was, Melchizedek set the record straight by reminding Abram, "Praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." It's found in Genesis 14:20. Abram recognized that this man worshiped the same God he did. Melchizedek was one of a small group of God honoring people throughout the Old Testament who came in contact with with Jews, Israelites, but were not Jews themselves. This indicates that the requirement to be a follower of God is not genetic, but is based on faithfully obeying his teachings and recognizing his greatness. Do you let God speak to you through other people? In evaluating others, do you consider God's impact on their lives? Are you aware of the similarities between yourself and others who worship God, even if their form of worship is quite different from yours? Do you know the God of the Bible well enough to know if you truly worship him? Allow Melchizedek, Abraham, David, and Jesus, along with many other persons in the Bible, to show you this great God, creator of heaven and earth. He wants you to know how much he loves you. He wants you to know him personally. So, his Melchizedek's strengths and accomplishments. He's the first priest, king of scripture, a leader with a heart tuned to God, good at encouraging others to serve God wholeheartedly, a man whose character reflected his love for God, a person in the Old Testament who reminds us of Jesus and who some people believe really was Jesus. Lessons from his life. Live for God, and you're likely to be at the right place at the right time. Examine your heart. To whom or what is your greatest loyalty? If you can answer honestly, God, you are living for him. Vital statistic: where? Ruled in Salem, site of the future Jerusalem. Occupation: king of Salem and priest of God Most High. Key verses: this Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Hebrews 7:1 and 7:4. Melchizedek's story. Melchizedek's story is told in Genesis 14:17 to 20. He is also mentioned in Psalms 110, 4, verse 4, Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7. Okay. So now we find Ishmael. Have you ever wondered if you were born into the wrong family? Oh, let me see how many minutes we are in. Okay, Ishmael. Have you ever wondered if you were born into the wrong family? We don't know much about Ishmael's viewed life, but that question must have haunted him at times. His life, his name, and his position were bound up in a conflict between two jealous women. Sarai, impatient with God's timetable, had taken matters into her own hands, deciding to have a child through another woman. Hagar, servant that she was, submitted to being used this way, but her pregnancy gave birth to strong feelings of superiority toward Sarah. Into this tense atmosphere, Ishmael was born. For 13 years, Abraham thought Ishmael's birth had fulfilled God's promise. He was surprised to hear God say that the promised child would be Abraham and Sarah's very own. Sarah's pregnancy and Isaac's birth must have had a devastating impact on Ishmael. Until then, he had been treated as a son and heir, but this late arrival made his future uncertain. During Isaac's weaning celebration, Sarah caught Ishmael teasing his half-brother. As a result, Hagar and Ishmael were permanently expelled from Abram's family. Much of what happened throughout his life cannot be blamed on Ishmael. He was caught in a process much bigger than himself. However, his own actions showed that he had chosen to become part of the problem and not part of the solution. He chose to live under his circumstances rather than above them. The choice he made is one we must all make. There are circumstances over which we have no control, heredity, for instance, but there are others that we can control, decisions we make. At the heart of the matter is the sin-oriented nature we have all inherited. It can be partly controlled, although not overcome, by human effort. In the context of history, Ishmael's life represents the mess we make when we don't try to change the things we could change. The God of the Bible has offered a solution. His answer is not control, but a changed life. To have a changed life, turn to God. Trust Him to forgive your sinful past and begin to change your attitude toward Him and others. Ishmael's strengths and accomplishments. One of the first to experience a physical sign of God's covenant, circumcision. Known for his ability as an archer and a hunter, fathered 12 sons who became leaders of warrior tribes. Weaknesses and mistakes. Failed to recognize the place of his half-brother Isaac and mocked him. Lesson from his life. God's plans incorporate people's mistakes. Vital statistics. Where? Canaan and Egypt. Occupation. Hunter, archer, warrior. Relative parents were Hagar and Abraham, and his half-brother was Isaac. Key verses. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 21:17 and 18. Ishmael's story is told in Genesis 16 through 17, 25, verses 12 through 18, 28, verse 8, 9, 36, 1 through 3. He's also mentioned in First Chronicles, first chapter 28 to 31, Romans 9, verses 7 to 9, and Galatians 4, verses 21 to 31. Okay, the next one is Abraham. We all know that there are consequences to any action we take. What we do can set into motion a series of events that may continue long after we're gone. Unfortunately, when we are making a decision, most of us think only of the immediate consequences. These are often misleading because they are short-lived. Abraham had a choice to make. His decision was between setting out with his family and belongings for parts unknown or staying right where he was. He had to decide between the security of what he already had and the uncertainty of traveling under God's direction. All he had to go on was God's promise to guide and bless him. Abraham could hardly have been expected to visualize how much of the future was resting on his decision of whether to go or stay, but his obedience affected the history of the world. His decision to follow God set into motion the development of the nation that God would eventually use as his own when he visited earth himself. When Jesus Christ came to earth, God's promise was fulfilled. Through Abraham, the entire world was blessed. You probably don't know the long-term effects of most decisions you make, but shouldn't the fact that there will be long-term results cause you to think carefully and seek God's guidance as you make choices and take action today? Abraham's strengths and accomplishments. His faith pleased God, became the founder of the Jewish nation, was respected by others, and was courageous in defending his family at any cost. It was not only caring, father to his own, but practiced hospitality to others, was a successful and wealthy rancher, usually avoided conflicts, but when they were unavoidable, he allowed his opponent to set the rules for settling the dispute, and under direct pressure, he distorted the truth. Oh, that's his weakness and mistake. Under direct pressure, he distorted the truth. Lessons from his life. God desires dependence, trust, and faith in him, not faith in our ability to please him. God's plan from the beginning has been to make himself known to all people. Vital statistics. Where? Born in Ur of the Chaldeans, spent most of his life in the land of Canaan. Occupation, wealthy livestock owner. Relatives, brothers Nahor and Haran. Father Terah, wife Sarah, nephew Lot, sons Ishmael and Isaac. Contemporaries, Abimelech and Melchizedek. Key verse. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. Abraham's story is told in Genesis 11 to 25. He's also mentioned in Exodus 2:24 Acts 7, 2 through 8, Romans 4, Galatians 3, Hebrews 2, 6, 7, and 11. Okay, the next one is Sarah. I think I'm going to have a sip of water because I've just read a lot. All right, so the next one is Sarah. There probably isn't anything hard to do than wait, whether we're expecting something good, something bad, or an unknown. One way we often cope with a long wait, or even a short one, is to begin helping God get his plan into action. Sarah tried this approach. She was too old to expect to have a child of her own, so she thought God must have something else in mind. From Sarah's limited point of view, this could only be to give Abraham a son through another woman, a common practice in her day. The plan seemed harmless enough. Abraham would sleep with Sarah's servant, who would then give birth to a child. Sarah would take the child as her own. The plan worked beautifully at first, but as you read about the events that followed, you will be struck by how Sarah must have regretted the day she decided to push God's timetable ahead. Another way we cope with a long wait is to gradually conclude that what we're waiting for is never going to happen. Sarah waited 90 years for a baby. When God told her she would finally have one of her own, she laughed. Not so much from lack of faith in what God could do, but from doubt about what he could do through her. When confronted about her laughter, she lied, as she had seen her husband do from time to time. She probably didn't want her true feelings to be known. What parts of your life seem to be on hold right now? Do you understand that this may be part of God's plan for you? The Bible has more than enough clear direction to keep us busy while we're waiting for some particular part of life to move ahead. Sarah's strengths and accomplishments was intensely loyal to her own child, became the mother of a nation, and an ancestor of Jesus, was a woman of faith, the first woman listed in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11. Weaknesses and mistakes, had trouble believing God's promises to her, attempted to work problems out on her own without consulting God, tried to cover her faults by blaming others. Lessons from her life. God responds to faith even in the midst of failure. God is not bound by what usually happens. He can stretch the limits and cause unheard of events to occur. Vital statistics. Where married Abram in Ur of the Chaldeans and moved with him to Canaan. Occupation: wife, mother, household manager. Relatives: father Terah, husband Abraham, half-brothers Nahor and Haran, nephew Lot, and son Isaac. Key verse: by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful. She considered him faithful who had made the promise. Hebrews 11:11. Sarah's story is told in Genesis 11 to 25. She's also mentioned in Isaiah 51:2, Romans 4 verse 19, Romans 9 verse 9, Hebrews 11 verse 11, 1 Peter 3 verse 6, chapter 3 verse 6. So that was Sarah. Wait, two of these pages do not want to come apart. All right, there's nothing in between. Isaac. A name carries great authority. It sets you apart. It triggers memories. The sound of it calls you to attention anywhere. Many Bible names accomplished even more. They were often descriptions of important facts about one's past and hopes for the future. The choice of the name Isaac, he laughs, for Abraham and Sarah's son, must have created a variety of feelings in them each time it was spoken. At times, it must have recalled their shocked laughter at God's announcement that they would be parents in their old age. At other times, it must have brought back the joyful feelings of receiving their long awaited answer to prayer for a child. Most importantly, it was testimony to God's power in making his promise a reality. In a family of forceful initiators, Isaac was the quiet, mind my own business type unless he was specifically called on to take action. He was he was the protected only child from the time Sarah got rid of Ishmael until Abraham arranged his marriage to Rebekah. In his own family, Isaac had the patriarchal position, but Rebekah had the power. Rather than stand his ground, Isaac found it easier to compromise or lie to avoid confrontations. In spite of these shortcomings, Isaac was part of God's plan. The model his father gave him included a great gift of faith in the one true God. God's promise to create a great nation through him, through which he would bless the world, was passed on by Isaac to his twin sons. It is usually not hard to identify with Isaac and his weaknesses, but consider for a moment that God works through people in spite of their shortcomings, and often through them. As you pray, put into words your desire to be available to God. You will discover that his willingness to use you is even greater than your desire to be used. Strengths and accomplishments, those are Isaac's. He was a miracle child born to Sarah and Abraham when Sarah was 90 years old and Abraham was 100. He was the first descendant in fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. He seems to have been a caring and consistent husband, at least until his sons were born. He demonstrated great patience. Weaknesses and mistakes. Under pressure, he tended to lie. In conflict, he sought to avoid confrontation. He played favorites between his sons and alienated his wife. Lessons from his life. Patience often brings rewards. Both God's plans and his promises are larger than people. God keeps his promises. He remains faithful, though we are often faithless. Playing favorites is sure to bring family conflict. Vital statistics where the area called the Negev in the southern part of Palestine between Kadesh and Shur, that's found in Genesis 20 verse 1. Occupation, wealthy livestock owner. Relatives, parents were Abraham and Sarah. Half-brother Ishmael, wife Rebekah. Sons, Jacob and Esau. Key verse. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will name him Isaac, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. Genesis 17, verse 19. Isaac's story is told in Genesis 17, verses 15 to 35, and Genesis 29. He's also mentioned in Romans 9, verses 7, also Romans 8, Hebrews 11, verses 17 to 20, and James chapter 2, verses 21 through 24. So that was, okay. Oh, we have Hagar. Okay. I think I'm going to take a break. I am back. Hagar. Escape of some kind is usually the most tempting solution to our problems. In fact, it can become a habit. Hagar was a person who used that approach. Sounds like me. When the going got tough, she usually got going in the other direction. However, it is worthwhile to note that the biggest challenges Hagar faced were brought on by other people's choices. Sarah chose her to bear Abraham's child, and Abraham probably had little to say in the matter. It isn't hard to understand how Hagar's pregnancy caused her to look down on Sarah, but that brought on hard feelings, and Sarah consequently punished Hagar. This motivated her first escape. When she returned to the family and gave birth to Ishmael, Sarah's continued barrenness must have contributed to bitterness on both sides. When Isaac was finally born, Sarah looked for any excuse to have Hagar and Ishmael sent away. She found it when she caught Ishmael's teasing Isaac. In the desert, out of water and facing death for her son, Hagar once again tried to escape. She walked away so she wouldn't have to watch her son die. Once again, once again, God graciously intervened. Have you noticed how patiently God operates to make our escape attempts fail? Have you begun to learn that escape is only a temporary solution? God's continual desire is for us to face our problems with His help. We experience His help most clearly in and through conflicts and difficulties, not away from them. Are there problems in your life for which you've been using the Hagar solution? Choose one of those problems, ask for God's help, and begin to face it today. Strength and accomplishments. Hagar was mother of Abraham's first child, Ishmael, who became father of the Arab nations. When faced with problems, she tended to run away. Her pregnancy brought out strong feelings of pride and arrogance. Lessons from her life. God is faithful to His plan and promises even when humans complicate the process. God shows Himself as one who knows us and wants to be known by us. The New Testament uses Hagar as a symbol of those who would pursue favor with God by their own efforts rather than by trusting in His mercy and forgiveness. Vital statistics: where Canaan and Egypt, occupation servant mother, relatives son Ishmael. Key verse: Then the angel of the Lord told her, Go back to your mistress and submit to her, as found in Genesis 16 verse 9. Hagar's story is told in Genesis 16 to 21. She's also mentioned in Galatians 4:24 and 25. So that's Hagar. Rebecca. Some people are initiators. They help get the ball rolling. Rebecca would easily stand out in this group. Her life was characterized by initiative. When she saw a need, she took action, even though the action was not always right. It was Rebecca's initiative that first caught the attention of Eliezer, the servant Abraham sent to find a wife for Isaac. It was common courtesy to give a drink to a stranger, but it took added character to also fetch water for 10 thirsty camels. Later, after hearing the details of Eliezer's mission, Rebecca was immediately willing to be Isaac's bride. Several later events help us see how initiative can be misdirected. Rebecca was aware that God's plan would be channeled through Jacob, not Esau. Genesis 25:23. So not only did Jacob become her favorite, she also planned ways to ensure that he would overshadow his older twin. Meanwhile, Isaac preferred Esau. This created a conflict between the couple. She felt justified in deceiving her husband when the time came to bless the sons, and her ingenious plan was carried out to perfection. Most of the time, we try to justify the things we choose to do. Often we attempt to add God's approval to our actions. While it is true that our actions will not spoil God's plan, it is also true that we are responsible for what we do and must always be cautious about our motives. When thinking about a course of action, are you simply seeking God's stamp of approval on something you've already decided to do? Or are you willing to set the plan aside if the principles and commands of God's words are against the action? Initiative and action are admirable and right when they are controlled by God's wisdom. Strengths and accomplishments of Rebecca. When confronted with a need, she took immediate action, and she was accomplishment oriented. Weaknesses and mistakes. Her initiative was not always balanced by wisdom. She favored one of her sons, and she deceived her husband. Lessons from her life. Our actions must be guided by God's words. By God's word, God makes use even of our mistakes by His plan. Parental favoritism hurts a family. Vital statistics: where? Haran, Canaan. Occupation: wife, mother, household manager. Relative: grandparents Nahor and Milcah, father Bethuel, husband Isaac, brother Laban, twin sons Esau and Jacob. Key verses: Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Genesis 24:67. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Genesis 25:28. Rebekah's story is told in Genesis 24 through 49. She is also mentioned in Romans 9, verse 10. That's it. That's it. Okay, so that's Rebekah. Esau. We're in chapter 25. Esau. Common sense isn't all that common. In fact, the common thread in many decisions is that they don't make sense. Esau's life was filled with choices he must have regretted bitterly. He appears to have been a person who found it hard to consider consequences, reacting to the need of the moment without realizing what he was giving up to meet that need. Trading in his birthright for a bowl of stew was the clear example of his weakness. He also chose wives in direct opposition to his parents' wishes. He learned the hard way. What are you willing to trade for the things you want? Do you find yourself at times willing to negotiate anything for what you need, for what you feel you need now? Or do your family, spouse, integrity, body, or soul get included in these deals? Do you sometimes feel that the important parts of life escaped you while you are grabbing for something else or someone else? If so, your initial response, like Esau's, may be deep anger. In itself, that isn't wrong, as long as you direct the energy of that anger towards a solution and not toward yourself or to others as a cause of the problem. Your greatest need is to find a focal point other than what I need now. The only worthy focal point is God. A relationship with Him will not only give an ultimate purpose to your life, it will also be a daily guideline for living. Meet Him in the pages of the Bible. So Esau's strengths and accomplishment. He was the ancestor of the Edomites, known for his archery skill and able to forgive after explosive anger. Weaknesses and mistakes. When faced with important decisions, tended to choose according to the immediate need rather than the long range of facts, angered his parents by poor marriage choices. Lessons from his life. God allows certain events in our lives to accomplish his overall purposes, but we are still responsible for our actions. Consequences are important to consider. It is possible to have great anger and yet not sin. Vital statistics: where in Canaan, occupation skillful hunter, relatives of his parents are Isaac and Rebekah, brother Jacob, wives Judith, Basemath, and Mahlah. Key verses: make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, for who a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. Hebrews 12, verses 14 to 17. Esau's story is told in Genesis 25 to 36. He is also mentioned in Malachi 1, verses 2, and Malachi 3, Romans 9, verse 13, Hebrews 12, verse 16, and Hebrews 17. So that's Esau. And now we have Jacob. And I think I'm going to take a break because this is a lot. Oh, no, I have only a few pages left. Nope, I'm not going to take a break. Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are among the most significant people in the Old Testament. It is important to realize that his significance is not based upon their personal characters, but upon the character of God. They were all men who earned the grudging respect and even fear of their peers. They were wealthy and powerful, and yet each was capable of lying, deceit, and selfishness. They were not the perfect heroes we might have expected. Instead, they were just like us, trying to please God, but often falling short. Jacob was the third link in God's plan to start a nation from Abraham. The success of that plan was often in spite of than more often in spite of than because of Jacob's life. Before Jacob was born, God promised that his plan would be worked out through Jacob and not his twin brother Esau. Although Jacob's methods were not always respectable, his skill, determination, and patience have to be admired. As we follow him from birth to death, we are able to see God's work. Jacob's life had 4 stages, each marked by a personal encounter with God. In the first stage, Jacob lived up to his name, which means he grasps the heel. Figuratively, he deceives. He grabbed Esau's heel at birth, and by the time he fled from home, he had also grabbed his brother's birthright and blessing. During his flight, God first appeared to him. Not only did God confirm to Jacob his blessing, but he awakened in Jacob a personal knowledge of himself. In the second stage, Jacob experienced life from the other side, being manipulated and deceived by Laban. But there is a curious change. The Jacob of stage 1 would simply have left Laban, whereas the Jacob of stage 2, after deciding to leave, waited 6 years for God's promise. In the third stage, Jacob was in a new role as grabber. This time, by the Jordan River, he grabbed onto God and wouldn't let go. He realized his dependence on God, but continued to bless him. His relationship to God became essential to his life, and his name was changed to Israel. He struggles with God. Jacob's last stages of life was to be grabbed. God achieved a firm hold on him. In responding to Joseph's invitation to come to Egypt, Jacob was clearly unwilling to make a move without God's approval. Can you think of times when God has made himself known to you? Do you allow yourself to meet him as you study his word? What difference have these experiences made in your life? Are you more like the young Jacob forcing God to track you down in the desert, or your own plans and mistakes? Or are you more like the Jacob who placed his desires and plans before God for his approval before taking any action? Strengths and accomplishments. Jacob, father of the 12 tribes of Israel, third in the Abrahamic line of God's plan, determined willingly to work long and hard for what he wanted, and he was a good businessman. Weaknesses and mistakes. When faced with conflict, relied on his own resources rather than going to God for help, tended to accumulate wealth for his own sake. Lessons from his life. Security does not lie in the accumulation of goods. All human intentions and actions, for good or evil, are woven by God into his ongoing plan. Vital statistics. Where? Canaan. Occupation, shepherd, livestock owner. Relatives, parents were Isaac and Rebekah. His brother was Esau. Father-in-law was Laban. Wives, Rachel and Leah. 12 sons and 1 daughter are mentioned in the Bible. So the key verse is, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And that's found in Genesis 28, verse 15. Jacob's story is told in Genesis 25 to 50. He's also mentioned in Hosea chapter 12, 2 to 5, verses 2 to 5. Matthew chapter 1, 2, chapter 22, verse 32. Acts 3, so chapter 3, verse 13, and Acts 7, verse 46. Romans chapter 9, verses 11 to 13. Romans 11, verse 26. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9, 20, 19, 20, and 21. Okay, so those are different. And that might be it. 29 and 30. Yep. And we're up to chapter 30. And when we reach chapter 30, or maybe before I reach chapter 30, there's Rachel's story. So I think I'm just going to start reading the stories before maybe I read the chapters. And I think we'll do it that way. I think it might make sense. Or after. I don't know. But you can tell me what makes sense to you. I hope you enjoy this. I did. And I am enjoying reading the Bible. It is talking to me. I hope that it's talking to you. It's talking to me about what I'm supposed to be doing with my life in the future. And I'm going to sit here and take some notes because things are coming together for me, I think. So thank you for listening. Thank you for studying the Bible with me. And I hope to see some comments, some questions. Let's chat. Let's talk. Okay? Have a great day.